Let's face it, we've all got way too many video games that will never see the light of day. Instead of letting them rot on the shelves, clog up your hard drives, and haunt you with guilt for all eternity, allow me to ease the burden. Should you backlog or bust? Been playing Elden Ring for the 5th time. What should I play next? Oh, I know! How about another hard-as-nails Souls-like? What can I say? I'm a glutton for pain, apparently, because I went on quite the roller coaster ride with Mortal Shell here. So right off the bat, this game looks and sounds just like Dark Souls, even down to the menus. The same grimy medieval fantasy we've come to know and love, but this time with a dash of Geiger thrown in for good measure. And good grief, are we one of the ugliest excuses for a protagonist I've ever seen? Naked Voldemort here gets his skull caved in by the tutorial boss and then gets swallowed by a zombie carp, and that's how you know for sure that this is a Souls game. For the uninitiated, Souls-likes are notoriously difficult third-person action role-playing games that typically reward cautious exploration and recognizing enemy attack patterns. They often use experience from battles as currency for merchants, as well as for leveling up your character, and this experience can all be lost on death. I love the franchise for how tense and rewarding the combat feels, how thoughtfully crafted the environments are, and how satisfying it is to grow stronger not just through leveling, but through an understanding of your weapons and enemy behaviors. They're certainly not for everyone, so if the idea of dying and retrying to overcome a gauntlet of punishing enemies doesn't sound like a relaxing power fantasy, which it does for me, then you may be best giving this one a bust right away. Well, Mortal Shell differentiates itself from Dark Souls in a number of ways, but first of all, the game features 4 distinct classes in the form of these shells from fallen heroes that we can squirm our way inside to hide our disgusting pasty body. We only get a choice of 4 weapon types, but the shells each play a little differently and have unique abilities like poison attacks or better parrying. There's also no refillable healing like the flasks in Dark Souls. Instead, we just have a few meager farmable health items like these mushrooms, kinda like in Bloodborne or Demon Souls. I hate this system for a number of reasons, because sure, you could run around and stock up on infinite healing items, but realistically it makes healing way more precious and annoying. Why bother pushing into dangerous territory with lots to lose for a chance at a checkpoint when I can just backtrack for free because my healing items are too rare? By having a set amount of health items per death, you can make calculated risks and recover from mistakes, but in this game, if I stub my toe on a poison frog, I won't even bother healing it off. I'll just hobble back because it's not worth the limited resource. It's also a huge pain to go into the menu because the load times between pages are abysmal. Cool it with the transitions and effects, just show me my friggin' loadout. Something I do like about consumables in this game is item familiarity. Whenever you pick something up for the first time, the game won't even tell you what it does until you just blindly use it. This is the part that I don't like as much because you're all but guaranteed to waste the first of every good item you get, and some items even have negative effects like getting poisoned from eating this tar spore. But the cool thing is that eating a second tar spore gives you a poison immunity because you're more familiar with how to eat this kind of mushroom. It adds a type of progression to each of your items that unlocks lore tidbits and even powers up how much healing or experience you gain from using that item. This encouraged me to use my consumables way more than in other games because I knew I was making them more efficient rather than saving them up for the very last minute. My favorite example of this system is the simple loot you can find. When you first try to use it, you fumble and pluck away at it to hilarious effect, but each time you practice with it, you become more confident and skilled until you're shredding out to Minstrel metal. It's too friggin' cute. And there's even a vagabond NPC I found who invited me to give up my life of adventuring and join him. And I did. There's this whole little ending montage of living the rest of my life with the vagabonds, eating rats, drinking moonshine, and playing my lute till dawn. That really put a big stupid smile on my face. After I bid my sack-headed friend farewell, I went back to my quest and immediately hit a brick wall with this Grisha boss. Now, the tried and true Souls approach is to keep fighting the guy over and over until you get the attack patterns down, but I just couldn't do enough damage and could only get hit like 4 times. Much like another honorary FromSoft Souls game, Sekiro, you get one chance to revive yourself before you die, but you have to make it back to your shell safely, so there's a slight moment of panic as you scramble to get around the enemies, but that's a pretty annoying system. And instead of being able to wield a shield, you can harden your body to shrug off one attack. While it admittedly looks badass, I hate this way more than just having a shield and a stamina bar, because you need to wait a considerable amount of time before you can harden again. There were so many times I didn't realize my meter hadn't recharged, and even if you quickly harden in fear, you still have to wait ages to use it again. This made me only really use it as a get-out-of-jail-free card when I was in trouble, or as a free chance to close the gap before hanging back and waiting until it was safe again. I figured I'd try to brush up on my parrying skills, but for some asinine reason, instead of rewarding players with a riposte attack for a successful parry, you have to use your special gauge to use a riposte at all. It's hard enough to parry, let alone use my special attack charge, which I'd rather save for my main weapon skills. So I decided to go back to the drawing board and try to get stronger, the other way to progress in Souls games. Unfortunately, there aren't traditional experience levels in Mortal Shell. You can't increase your health or attack damage by grinding enemies, just this clunky skill wheel with not very enticing upgrades. Minor cooldown reductions, maybe a little extra speed or health here or there. It was pretty discouraging, and the only good upgrades you could get were way too expensive for me to feasibly get in the first zone. Even if I wanted to grind experience, enemies can drain your health crazy fast, especially if they stagger their attacks, so even hardening isn't a guaranteed way to avoid damage. And that's not even considering the larger enemies that just feel unfair without upgrades. They like to stand still and wait for you to whiff, glitch unexpectedly into unavoidable attacks, or track you with huge sweeping attacks if you try to run past. I even encountered a soft lock where I got stuck in a diving animation and had to turn the game off. Things were looking pretty grim, especially in this indie mode. Good gracious, I thought this game was already muddy. So I decided to throw in the towel. I wrote some pretty scathing notes for this episode and called it a day. But for the next few days, I couldn't quite get the game out of my head. There must have been something I was missing, some hidden mechanic, better weapon, or another path to take. So against my better judgment, I went back and took another stab at it. I consulted the wiki, another staple of my experience with Souls games, and researched which shell and weapon combo might be best suited for my defensive playstyle. So I bum rushed my way past all the enemies to grab my boy Aerodrim, snagged a few upgrade materials for my sword, and as the kids say, got good. Sure, the Black Knight over here gets winded faster than me after 10 minutes of ring fit, but he takes hits like nobody's business. Forget getting knocked down in 4 hits, I could shrug off more than double the amount and not break a sweat. This felt way more in line with what I could expect for the difficulty of a typical Souls game, especially with no reliable healing and levels that often required killing dozens of enemies to reach any checkpoint. I was just having way more fun. It almost felt as if the game expected me to beeline for the build I wanted right away, because there are laughably few upgrade materials in the game to experiment with different weapons, and you need to collect experience and level up each shell individually, so there's no incentive to mix and match on the fly. It's honestly a pretty frustratingly limited experience, but if you find the loadout that clicks, it's a hell of a lot more enjoyable. I was finally able to appreciate the environmental and enemy designs, which has some truly stunning standouts. This towering obsidian archive rivaled some of my favorite Souls level design for sheer spectacle, and my huge health pool made group encounters way more fun and engaging. I went from outright despising my time with Mortal Shell to tolerating its jank to getting actually invested in seeing my way to the end. I even splurged on the DLC so I could try out the new character and get my hands on some more sweet loots. The DLC even adds an entire roguelike progression mode, which I could see getting really addicting, but it reminded me of how brutally punishing the game is without a maxed out character and weapon. It all feels like the game is compensating difficulty for length here, because the game is super short and shallow overall. Much like NES games of old, this one focused on replay value and unfair difficulty at times to pad out its content, so by the time I beat the final boss, I was exhausted. Not in the satisfied way I'm used to in Souls for overcoming adversity and conquering the game, but in a thank God that's over kind of way. Mortal Shell is super derivative, without a whole lot that makes it special, and the stuff it chooses to be different from Dark Souls usually just makes it feel worse than Dark Souls. Maybe for the masochists out there who thought Elden Ring was too easy to break and exploit will enjoy a more tightly crafted difficulty on display here, but I can't even imagine playing this game with the speedy glass cannon build. Some people swear by it, so there's certainly an audience for that kind of playstyle. So here I am, on the precipice between Backlog and Bust. The hardest call I've had to make on the show so far, but if I had to trust my gut, Mortal Shell still gets a bust. Despite the enjoyment I eventually found, I had to claw tooth and nail to find it. And even at its best, Mortal Shell is still worse than any other Souls game I've ever played, so there's really no reason to bother unless you've exhausted every other entry. But I absolutely don't regret my time in the land of Falgrim. In fact, I'll always relish that memory of the ironclad knight in the woods, shredding away on his lute. But the journey's not over yet. Tune in next week for one more deep cut. Keep it clean out there, and I'll see you in the next one.